Welcome.
This is another episode of the Defenders of Business Value podcast, a podcast where we talk about what makes a business valuable, learn the tips and tactics to increase your company's value that only veteran deal makers know. And now, here's your host, Ed Meisogland.
Welcome back to another episode of Defenders of Business Value. I had one of the best visits I had in a long time, and I visited with Dawn Bloomer, and she is an exit planner and she works predominantly in professional practices. And, one of the things that I really enjoyed talking to her about that not many people address is the mental health aspects of this whole exit planning process. And as a professional practice, as an owner of a professional practice, you find out, that business is you, or so much of it is you. And how do you limit yourself in not being the entire business? And the funny thing is, when talking with Dawn, her practice is called productive pressure, and she has an interesting analogy. Because she comes from a horse racing background. She's a veterinarian, and she had sold her practice, and she's taking a lot of the landmines that she stomped on, and she's helping other professional practices understand the same, how to avoid the mistakes that she did. And so one of the things that I so appreciated our conversation was not only how transparent she was, because she made mistakes, and it's hard to admit those, but what more so, I really respected the fact that she was talking about how it affected her personally. And so I'm certain that you will enjoy my conversation with Dawn Bloomer of Productive Pressure. Well, welcome to the show, Dawn. Great to have you.
Great to be here, Ed. Thanks so much for having me.
So before you came on, I gave kind of a high-level view of you and your practice, but I likely did not do it justice. So if you would, just talk a little bit about your practice and how you got to where you are.
Sure. So for over 20 years, I was actually a veterinarian for racehorses. So my background is in the professional services industry. And like a lot of professional services folks, I learned an awful lot about being a veterinarian when I was in school, not so much about being a business owner. And so I sort of became an accidental entrepreneur when I bought into our practice. I was fortunate to be part of a really well-established practice that was already very profitable. And it was profitable mostly because it was a bunch of people working really, really hard. And we were in an industry at the time that was doing really well. As time went on, I sort of came to realize that I probably needed to know a little bit more about business, because when 2008 hit, the economy wasn't quite as strong. We started to hit a few little road bumps. And I thought, I think I should learn something about how we should really be doing this. And that's when I went back and got my MBA. And after I did that, I started to realize all the things that we'd sort of been getting lucky on, and
Yeah.
and I realized that we were making up for a lot of our, I hate to say it, but really inadequacies in the
Sure.
business management department by just working harder and longer and more and billing more and doing more procedures. And we really just focused on the top line. Now, we tried to manage our expenses and all of those things, but we weren't doing any of it in a very deliberate way. And so that gave us a huge opportunity to start refining the way we were doing things. And ultimately, it was a long and circuitous route, but eventually we were able to merge our practice with a group of 30 something other practices across the US. We grew that for a while, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to be part of the deal team, where we went out and looked for other practices to buy and add to our group. we did a lot of that during COVID, which was exciting. And then sort of as COVID was settling in, we were approached by a much larger aggregator owned by a private equity group. And the powers that be decided that that was a good move. And so at that point, I had spent a lot of time doing, biz dev and talking to a lot of practice owners across the world, like all over the world. Because when we were growing our group, we were looking everywhere. Yeah. And I started to see a lot of the same problems that we had in our practice, and had a lot of really difficult conversations with practice owners, and realized that a lot of them had no plan for the future. And so when they came to us, they were looking for an exit, but they hadn't planned it. And so they were coming to us and they thought, well, I've got a lot of revenue. I'm making a lot of money. We're profitable. Why don't you want to buy us? And so those conversations were really hard because these people had poured their blood, sweat, and tears into their business. It was their baby. And it was sort of like us telling them it was ugly. It's like, sorry, it has no value. So anyway, that was the long way of telling you that's how I ended up getting into, basically my whole goal is to help other professional services providers remove themselves from the center of their business so that not only can they have a business that has more value when they finally decide to exit, but in the meantime, they can have a better quality of life. And, their business can kind of give them what they always thought it would.
Yeah. And enter productive pressure, right? So
yes.
That's where that came from. Okay. So I'll just segue right into it. So the power of productive pressure, striking the balance between drive and well-being. That's kind of your tagline. I'm just curious to know, I'm assuming throughout your travels that this has been kind of percolating and marinating, and then after your own exit, this became kind of the mantra for your practice. Is that right? Or
that's right. Talk a little bit? Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So as a veterinarian, for racehorses, obviously like kind of a special niche, my role was to help the trainer make sure that the horse could get fit enough to run fast, on its spindly little legs around an oval at high speeds without getting injured. And obviously, you have to apply enough pressure to them so that they get fitter, their bones get stronger, their muscles develop, and they're able to take more and more stress, if you will, without giving them applying so much pressure that they get injured. And I feel like that was sort of the sense I wanted to bring into this, because I think during COVID, especially, we became very aware of how many professional service providers were burning out and were leaving their chosen profession because they just decided they couldn't take it anymore. And so I thought that was sort of a good way to frame the fact that stress in and of itself isn't bad. It's actually necessary.
Good. Yeah.
But it's what we do with it and how we help ourselves adapt to it. And so I like to talk a lot about mental fitness and how we can be proactive instead of just becoming more resilient and being reactive. We can actually become more proactive about how we approach that.
I see. So and again, in our practice, I tend to hire CPAs, accountants, and the other is former exited business owners that they bring an entirely different level of empathy. And, I've walked in your shoes, and I think from where I sit, I think that's really interesting about how your practice developed, not only just because of the exit, but also because, you were a veterinarian, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny you said it, because I have an exited veterinarian on our staff, and we tend not to get into that, but my point is, the transferable empathy to these business owners are, I think, and I assume you agree with me, that it just resonates. Somebody to talk to that, I know what you're feeling, and I know the things that I'm going to ask you may be difficult, but I'm telling you that you can see the
I've
other
been
side.
there. Yes.
Right.
And I think you're right. And I think the other thing is that as a professional and someone who's highly trained, it's often hard to ask for help or
Yeah.
to admit what you don't know. We think we should be able to figure it out. We're smart people. Look what we went through to get where we are. And so I think the fact that I can stand up and say, hey, I did this stuff and I did it wrong. I did it wrong. I did it backwards. I didn't know what I was doing for most of the time. And it's nothing to be ashamed of or to feel bad about. But if you're willing to, take the time to learn how, you can do it differently and you can do it better.
Well, and that leads us to the next question about value growth and exit planning. And one of the things I really appreciated you doing is helping me with some of my questions, because I have, I have kind of my set way of looking at it, but you brought up something that was really interesting, and that was the growth and exit planning. Can they coexist? Because that is those are two different animals, and as it relates to productive pressure, the two different animals. I'm saying animals. Yeah,
we use that. Thanks.
Go figure.
Yeah, two different animals.
Yeah. So you've got two different manners of which you're addressing the business, and I guess I want to talk a little bit about that. How do they coexist, and how do you balance that?
Sure. So I think that one of the misconceptions is you are either trying to grow or you're trying to get out. And I think that if you start far enough in advance thinking about what your eventual exit might be, and I think where people get hung up is they don't even want to think about exiting because it sounds very final, and then what am I going to do, and da. So the beauty is that all of the things that you do to build value in your business will actually make it more, easier to sell at the end of the road.
Yeah.
So if you can get people thinking less about the exit, sometimes it helps them to be willing to work on the value of the business. We tend to focus a lot on profitability, right? Like, well, how much money am I making? How much am I going to put in my pocket? And that's terrific. I think what really hit me was all these people had very profitable businesses, and none of them had valuable businesses. They were only valuable to them in so much as they could support their lifestyle. But when they wanted to leave, they were going to be walking away and basically liquidating for the value of the assets they had on hand. And to me, I felt like that was it's just a terrible waste. Like, I think it's an economic and an emotional waste. I mean, all that effort you put in. So to me, it's this idea that you've got to have an exit plan. You do, because otherwise even if you don't make one, you're going to have one, because at the end of the day, if you don't plan, your plan will be to liquidate.
Well, one way or the other, you will be exiting.
One way or the other, you will be exiting. I think the other thing, as you well know, is that a lot of people don't realize that more than 80% of businesses do not get sold. And so I think people assume that when the time comes, they're just going to be able to sell and get something out of it.
Yeah, I think, and I think that a lot of business owners look at their peers and they say, if he or she fumbled through it, certainly I can do it. And the problem is that those aren't necessarily the same circumstances that they somehow managed to get through. And these business owners, as you're coaching them and talking to them about value and value growth, they don't understand. And this is a statistic that we keep. If you do any value work, and I'm talking whether it's evaluation or talking about exit planning or just meeting with someone that talks to you about the sale process, whether you choose to sell or you're going third party or you're selling it to your kid or whoever, it changes from a 20% success rate to an 80%.
Wow.
It flips on its head. that having that conversation puts you in such a superior position to take those next steps, because you now know, you now know that how somebody's going to look at your business,
Yes.
and as you've identified, where are the chinks in the armor and how are we going to offset that? And that's, and to me, I think that's such the value that you bring. And when we're talking professional practices, there's not a whole lot of tangible assets. So
Right.
so that's where we're going to go next is
Yes.
when you're looking at these businesses where, and like I said, I'm dressed in a tie because I was an expert witness earlier today. We start talking a lot about goodwill and how do you transfer that value to the next person. So that's where I'd like to go next, is talk about, some of the coaching examples that you have that get you out of being that person, because the first thing that any buyer or anybody that is addressing risk is going to do is say, you are the business. So how do we work around that?
Well, and I think for professional services providers, it's a big challenge because they're used to being the most responsible, arguably the most important person. They have all the answers, right? Like, we're used to being the person. We want our clients to believe that we are the one, right? I mean, that's why we went to school for all those years, so that we would be the one. The challenge with that is I feel like oftentimes that role becomes a part of our identity. And so we're very reticent about giving any of it up. And I think that it creates this really this sort of catch-22 situation, because as long as you are the most important person, that's great. You may be the rainmaker, but you're not building value, and there's no succession plan in that. And so this is why sometimes working with solopreneurs is tough, because they struggle with the bringing in a younger person or another person and giving some of that up. And over time, transferring that goodwill, as you talked about, to that next person. Now, even that is not the whole solution, though, right? Because that's fine. So you transfer it to a successor. So you kind of just kicked the thing down the road, which sometimes is the best you can do given your timeline. But if you have more roadway, then not only can you look at, passing it on to your successor, but actually having many people that are involved, and sometimes bringing in another group and creating more. I like to talk about the fall down factor. Like the concern that a buyer has, which should be your concern as well, is mitigating risk. And so I talk about, well, what if you fall down? Who's stepping into your shoes, and how long is that sustainable if it's not actually you? And this is why this whole idea of exit planning versus value building, to me, I mean, they really dovetail nicely, because this removing yourself from the center of your business is the number one. It's part of this whole process of mitigating risk, which is what a buyer wants to see. Is they want profits, sure. They want they want a strong EBITDA, but they want to know that their risk is mitigated as much as they can. And so that whole idea is great. Yeah, transfer it to the successor. So that involves things like having really promoting them to your customers, really helping them learn how to do things the way you do. And that falls into that whole idea of creating systems and processes that support what you're doing, so that anybody could really walk in and do things. Sure, you're going to have different personalities, but if you start working on what does your brand look like, and we don't think a lot about branding as professional service providers a lot, but when you look at some of the new brands that are coming into some of these areas, their brand is everything.
Right.
Their product it's nowhere close to a lot of what the mom and pop shops are doing, but their brand is spectacular. It's pretty, and people can go on the app and there's no friction. It's easy to make an appointment. They can get in to see someone when they want to, for whatever it is.
Right. Well, and what I was taking a note while you were talking, one of the telltale signs for a business owner is that question: how do you introduce yourself? And this is a thing from John Murillo from Built to Sell.
Yep.
How do you identify? And that will that answers a lot of the question on how you view your business and how you're going to, I suppose, how you're going to accept exit planning.
Yes.
One of the, give me 1 second here. I was looking at Mary Mills. She was on episode, I think she was on episode 84. And Mary Mills, because you were talking about processes. And one of
Yes.
the things that Mary Mills does, and she's over in your neck of the woods too.
Ooh, I'll have to look it up.
So she helps document processes. That,
Mhm.
I mean, that's her whole business, is coming in and sitting and documenting, because all these business owners that just fight that, that
Yes.
it's just a matter
Yes.
of, here, come follow me around. I'll tell you all the processes. And my point, and this is moving into the next question that I had, which had to do with technology.
Yeah.
And I bring her up only because, she's leveraging technology to help you document your processes, so the next person or persons can follow along. So what technology are you seeing in the exit planning space that aids in I guess amplifying the strategy for whatever that might be, whether it's eventual exit or succession?
So you mean as far as the type of technology I'm using with my clients, or that using within those businesses to help document?
So how can technology be utilized to aid in effective business strategy?
So there are so many ways. I love technology. I was an early adopter of just about everything. I've slowed down a little, but I'm got a little more careful about it. But I think what happens to a lot of professional service providers is that they may have embraced some technology. Some of them have not. Some of them, it blows me away sometimes when I'll go in and they'll still have paper chits for things and a clipboard, and I'm going, wow, no judgment. Right. But I'm like, wow, this is exciting because we've got opportunities here. I would say that there are so many places where you can make technology work for you. The key is to pick the right technology, which is always a challenge, and not to overdo it. You don't want technology to be a solution looking for a problem. You want to use technology in places where it really is going to add value to you and to your customers. And there's all sorts of simple stuff. When it comes to SOPs, there are very elaborate ways of documenting your processes now. But what I like to do is I like to try and tap people, like I'm going to look up Mary, because I like to tap people who are very good at a specific thing and have them help clients do that. Because the reality is that you want to do it well and you want to do it efficiently, and kind of muddling your way through it is not always helpful. There are lots of different practice management softwares, depending on the type of business that you have, that can be very helpful. It can also be overwhelming because there are so many. There are so many types of software, and everybody's, branding and marketing theirs to be the best for all of the things. And the reality is most of the things that say they do everything don't do anything very well. So I think that it's really important to be mindful when you're making those investments. The other thing I see a lot of is people have become very entrenched in whatever software they're using. They're afraid of the switching costs. And rightfully so. I mean, sometimes it's expensive. It's always painful in the beginning, but there are times and places where just changing something like, your operating system can be a game changer and really make things a lot more efficient. And those are the kind of things that I mean, a business that you want to work in and it's easy to run is a business that someone's going to want to buy.
Amen. Well, I'll tell you, and along those same lines that you referenced, one of the things is like custom software. That is either a really good thing or a really bad thing. And for whoever is looking at it, because you've customized it so much to your liking that it makes it next to impossible to pivot if you so choose without a lot of pain.
Yes.
One of the things, some of the antiquated businesses that you see and we see too, I talk to a number of buyers that as soon as they start seeing paper and paper processes, that's a value penalty. It does not mean, it may not be,
It may not be a deal killer, but it's definitely a value
right,
detractor. Yes.
Right.
Because who wants to take on that job of changing all of that over?
And
it's a lot.
And the problem is that, or one of the problems is that it brings on a whole new level of scrutiny, that
yes.
people make mistakes. Software tends not to, if it's programmed
and
correctly.
If it does, usually you can find it. Yes. Right. Great. And you're right. I think that's a great point, Ed, is this whole idea that all the things you want to do in preparing to sell a business is just what you talked about. You want to decrease the amount of scrutiny. So you want to make sure that you covered all of your risk mitigation. So, you've transferred your goodwill, you have all your insurance things lined out, you have all of your regulatory. That's a big thing in professional services practices is every state, every jurisdiction has different regulatory rules. Not even talking about OSHA, but we don't, not just the HR stuff, but the actual regulatory things for your particular industry. And that's a big deal to a buyer. Anything around accounting and your processes, they're again a process thing. And so to me, all of that is wrapped up in that whole idea of making sure that your systems and processes are well thought out and well documented.
Yeah. And in fact, we have, and we say it, and we tell the people we work with, we want you to start thinking about a deal room. I don't care if you're a decade away from selling, just start compiling, just have it in one spot. And, time kills all deals. And if you are locked and loaded and you have your regulatory, all your regulatory matters in one folder that you don't have to fumble around trying to find when that time comes, oh my gosh, you're so many miles ahead.
Yes. Because most people are not going to have done that. And you're so right, because it's the little things that when it comes to the deal make all the difference. And I learned all of that the hard way. We did it the first time. I had no clue. And boy, was it painful. Was it painful? And I thought we had pretty neat and tidy stuff. I was pretty pleased with myself, However, I had no idea what we were getting into. And we we undertaken anything like that and had no experience. And we did a lot of stuff wrong. There were a lot of places where we could have done much better for ourselves. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I learned a lot from doing things the hard way.
Well, now you're sharing it, but
I'm sharing it, but that's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's also why, to your point, I have a lot of empathy about it. Yeah. It's also why, like, the handling the culture of even talking about an exit plan, even if you're talking about an exit plan 10 years in the future, people sometimes it makes them uncomfortable talking to their team about it. And those are things that I spend, as I'm sure you do, I spend a lot more time around mindset and dealing with those kind of issues than I ever thought I would going into it. I was sort of, we're the management part of it, the nuts and bolts of it, or the hard part. It's not. The hardest, for me, the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around is really a lot of the stuff around the mindset of changing the way you think about your business, changing the way you think about how you want to do business and why you want to do it that way, and then how you communicate that to your team. And
that's a good place to segue, because like I was telling you, so my wife's a therapist, and
that's cool.
Well, at times, depending on which side of the interview you're on. So I do think that that the sale of a business or the exit, or anytime you're starting to address your identity, whatever that might be,
Yeah.
you bump into some challenges that perhaps, and in my case, I was talking about the this expert witness testimony. I mean, this guy's sitting here going, you know what, I gave everything to this business. I gave my marriage for this business.
Sure.
I gave up going to my kids' events, and here we are. And you're telling me it's worth this, or somebody's telling me it's worth this, or this buyer's telling me it's worth this. So I guess that's where I want to go with this. Next question is to talk a little bit about, just mental health surrounding this event or the planning of it. And, how are you coaching the people you're working with about that?
So this is like one of my favorite topics, because I lived the dream, right? By the time I was 6, I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. I spent, the next 20 something years getting there. I bought into a practice. And then right as I was buying into the practice, I got pregnant. By that point, I was already on my second marriage. And then as my kids, as I had my son, and 3 weeks later went back to work, took him with me. Because, I thought that was the only way that I could prove that I was still committed to the thing. And, I'd just been asked to buy in. And did anybody tell me I had to do that? No, absolutely not. But that's how I felt. And so that's what I did. Then 2 years later, I had my daughter, and I scheduled to be induced. I had someone to cover for me for 3 weeks. I went back. This time I was like, having her in the barn and in the truck all the time with the two of them with the nanny was probably going to be a lot. So I bought an RV and I parked it at the racetrack, because that's what you do, right? So
you're committed.
Fast forward, you just make it happen. But to your point, I missed out on all sorts of things. I missed out on soccer games. I missed out on school plays. I missed out on, cooking breakfast for my kids in the morning, which, a lot of people probably think that's not such a bad thing, but I missed out on a lot of stuff. And at some point you think I missed out on vacations. Like I worked all holidays because of the way our business was until much later in my career. Yeah. And I am now on marriage number 3. And in between there, I had all sorts of highs and lows with my own journey with mental health and dealing with the stress of all of it. I got to a point where I used to hide out in the bathroom at the track, in the barn, in the bathroom, because I just needed peace for like 5 minutes. And if I was in my truck, people would come and I'd sit there and I'd journal sitting on the toilet. So this whole idea of mental health and how ingrained we get in ourselves having to be that person who is the center of the thing. So I spent a lot of time working with people on, why did you start the business in the first place? Right? Because a lot of times by the time they come to me, they're kind of at the point where it's like, well, I've been doing all this, and for what? Like, I've got money now. I don't have time to spend it. What? Yeah. Like, it's almost like an existential crisis, Sure. And so it's getting back to that why. So why did you start it in the first place? Why was it important to you to be a business owner? Mm-hmm. And why did that drive you to do all of these things? What I find happens a lot is that our values when we started the business were different. What was really important to us when we started are often different, because we go through major life changes along the way. And so by the time we get here, where we're looking like we've really accomplished everything and we're very successful, it doesn't feel good. Yeah. It should, you'd think, like you did the thing that you wanted to do, but it doesn't feel good anymore because your life has changed along the course of this. And now what was important to you here is not the same as what's important to you now. So I spend a lot of time having people do stuff that doesn't sound very exit planning business oriented, but really around identifying what your values are, what is really important to you, and like, what's your why now? And then using that, because we spend a lot of time talking about the business, but at the end of the day, for the owner of the business to be comfortable selling, they need to know what's next for them. Whether that's, in a year or 10 years, they need to know what's next, like have some sense of it. It might change, but have some sense of it. We spend a lot of time on the why, like why, and then creating a vision around that, and then backtracking from that to figure out what we need to do to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think the business owner, as I I think that they begin to, if they can get over the fact that the business is part of them, not necessarily all of them.
Yes.
I think that they kind of come to the realization that, you know, there will be something after this,
Yes.
and so it, but I don't think that business owners get the credit that they deserve of the mental challenges that they go through. No one, unless you're in it, no one understands, payroll keeps coming. No one
Yes.
understands the personal guarantees that have been given. No one understands that when someone, when a lawsuit comes or
Yes.
someone is pissed at you,
Yep.
who's going to address it?
Yep.
And that takes a toll. And especially in professional practices, where perhaps your name's on the marquee, that's
Yes.
not only, that's reputational harm,
Yes.
and you don't want to jeopardize that. And so,
You're absolutely right. And it is real. The struggle is real. And this, to your point, that stress, it never leaves. And so that's one of the reasons why this whole idea of work-life balance to me feels like BS, right? Like it's not about work versus life. Work is part of your life.
yeah,
There are lots of parts to your life, or at least hopefully there should be. And so if you're trying to balance work and life, work's going to win every time because of that, because you
yeah,
can't shut off the worry about
right,
all the things that could and do happen in the business. You can't just shut it off because you have a lot of people relying on you. And also to your point, it is your reputation.
yeah.
And that matters. I mean, you spent a lot of time building that.
Well, I've interviewed a lot of people, and you might be the first that has addressed this. And my wife will be tickled to death to know that there is someone in the exit space that's addressing that.
Yeah.
And I applaud you, because I do believe that, especially in the service industry,
Yeah.
that is a real challenge. I would put that up against even business value. That,
I
you know,
agree. I agree. And that's why really what I really focus on is this idea of removing, the owner from the center of the business. Because I feel like that's where it all starts. If we can get that part done, it's the hardest part. If we can get that part right,
yeah,
then the rest of it flows from there. And I always start with that. That, and you need to have a sense of what your business value is at
yeah,
the outset, because often that's something that people have a number in their head, and they've even put it on their personal net worth statement, and
sure,
they're making all of their other decisions based on this little
yeah.
pie in the sky number, and that makes me nervous too. I'm a mom. I worry about stuff. I want people to
Well,
be okay.
yeah. Well, the thing is that that they will, and the idea of insulation, um, I it should be appealing, but the path of releasing control, that's the road to hoe. That's
It is.
hard to
It
do.
is. It
But
is.
you know what? If and I wish, you being in the exit space, and I wish there was more. And an exit plan, while it's been around, I think it's still infancy, but
Yes. Yeah.
I
Agreed.
wish there was more data. I wish there was more
Yeah.
empirical evidence to say, you know what, I know I'm doing it in my shop, but wouldn't it be great to know that, if you move this lever, here is the change of value. And I think John Warillo is on his way
Yeah.
with Value Builder on,
Yes.
the 8 value drivers. But from an exit planning standpoint, holistically, I would just be curious to see how some of these things really affect everything post exit. But
yes, I agree. I agree 100%, because I do think that we talk a lot about leading up to exit, but the post exit and the post transaction integration, and depending on what you're doing, is another whole nut in and of itself. And there is a lot of emotion and a lot of there's a lot of, change is hard, right? And that's why you always want to make sure that in a transition that you're trying to run towards something you want, not run away from something you don't want, because it changes the whole flavor of it. If you are running away because you're tired of it, you don't want to do it anymore, versus you're running towards something you're excited about, it really changes, the flavor of the transition.
Yeah, it changes the dynamic also, and it also changes you as a seller. That I am leaving one chapter, but I'm opening another, rather than I'm
desperate to get out of here. I can't wait to leave.
Right, and as you know, 75% of business owners regret selling, and because they just what
now what?
There's only so much tennis and golf and such to do.
Yeah, and you go meet some new people. You go to a dinner party where you haven't seen people in a while, and they're like, "Oh, well, what are you doing?" Like, I was there. I've been there. I've been through that. It's not for nothing, You just kind of want to hide out for a while until you figure it out.
No, I get it. And the funny thing is, I don't think that retirement has the same ring to it.
No.
I think those that want to remain relevant, if they can kick the retirement can down the aisle, hey, perfect. In fact, I'm more excited for those people that if they want to, if they want to be carried out of their business, that's great. Just do yourself a favor. Let somebody know that that's what you want to do, and that's what you're going to do.
Yes. Well, I think you're completely right.
Well, I've been keeping you a long time, and so I want to be sensitive to it. So the last
chatty. I get excited.
No, just the opposite. No, you've been great. The one question I ask everybody, and I've done this since day one, is if you had one piece of advice that you would give the business owner that would have the most impact on their business, what would it be?
Most impact on their business.
Yep.
One piece of advice that would have the most impact on their business.
Yep.
It's sound really odd, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the one piece of advice for the thing that will have the most impact on their business is to set aside 1 hour a week of thinking time.
Okay.
And I say that because that 1 hour a week of you giving space for just thinking about, what do you want to do? Or why are you doing this? But to think about what you want personally, 1 hour. We spend a lot of time working on our business, 1 hour for you to think about the possibilities. Because for me, I had a mentor that had me do that. And then he would actually hold me accountable because I'm like, I don't have time for an hour. What are you talking about? You're nuts. And he made me put in my calendar, and then we'd have a call right after for 15 minutes to make sure I did it. Changed my life because it moved me into a mindset of possibilities.
Sure.
I wouldn't spend any time trying to figure out how I could make the things happen. I would just think about what all the possibilities were. And it was amazing. All the things that opened up from that, it opened up my thinking. And I think that we don't hold space for ourselves as business owners. We're too busy doing the thing, putting out fires. So just holding space for yourself.
What a great answer. No one has.
I was trying to come up with something clever and businessy, but
no, that works.
Its impact for me, that was the thing that really, like, for me, was a game changer.
Well, how can we find you? What's the best way to connect with you?
So I spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn now because I've learned that one must. But you can also find me on my website at productivepressure.com. And all of my contact information is there. So productivepressure.com is easy.
Yeah. And we'll have every place that we can find you in the show notes. I've had a great time visiting with you.
Me too. This has been thank you so
fun.
much.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to to having you back, because I would be curious here in the next couple of years, because I do think that, professional practices, they're going to be it seems as though out of all the subsegments of entrepreneurship, it seems as though professional practices are really starting to pick up speed. And
Yes.
so I'm really interested to get more data points on what you're seeing. So
I would love that. I'm actually really excited for all the opportunities that are coming in the pipeline, because I think that there is a lot of opportunity, and now is the time. Now is the time when, it seems like everything is a struggle. It's not. This is when the smart people are buckling down and getting prepared for what's coming next.
Nice. Well, Don, we'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ed.
This was another episode of the Defenders of Business Value podcast. For more episodes packed with strategies to increase the value of your business, visit defendersofbusinessvalue.com for show notes, transcripts, and free tools to start you on your journey. Subscribe now so you don't miss any future episodes.